Now you all know what this is. No problem with Marcel Duchamp, except that, I mean, they're a little, it's crazy that proportionally the bottle rack should be smaller, but so what. And also, a funny thing in the way slides and pictures were presented over the past, like, how many years since he made these, not made them, but said they're art. Originally, the bottle rack was in much worse condition. And slowly it became more like, I wouldn't say glitzy, but a little slick. Okay, but why am I showing you this? You all know this. It's not an art history class. Because I wanted to make a point about a word called transubstantiation. Does anyone know what it is? Someone out there does. Okay. You know what it is?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's when you believe that the host is actually, the bread of Christ is actually Christ's body.
Right. But it also, if that's it, but it also means that the priest is within that thinking, is the one who has the power to say, that turns it into Christ's body by saying, this is my body, okay? So, but what it means is the appearance of bread stays there, but it's a body, okay? And the wine becomes blood, if someone believes that within, like a Catholic would believe that. So Marcel Duchamp actually borrowed that from medieval theology. If you read his talks and his writing, he'll talk about it. And it's a nifty trick to like, because the art is always open to like, if you borrow something from a source that most people don't know, then it seems like you're doing something new. See, he really didn't do something new. He just took something from like the Catholic Middle Ages, which is like saying like, oh, that thorn was in Christ's crown of thorns. Except in the Catholic Middle Ages, they would like set it in a big gold filigree or something. But he's part of like the belief system we inherit, and the part that an artist can theoretically and actually say anything is art. Okay, but this you know. Okay, this is the New Jersey Turnpike. Now I'm using this for a reason, to set things in a historical place and time, because I'm very autobiographical and sociological in my art. The purpose is to encourage you to be autobiographical and sociological, because I believe that like things come and go in the art world, but you always have your own memories, and you have that unique coming together of a culture colliding, colluding, whatever word you want to pick, with yourself and where you're situated in life. So this picture there shows how the turnpike being built, this is like in 1950, it cuts the city of Elizabeth in half. It like knocks down thousands of houses. They're over there knocked down. And if the picture on the bottom over there, you can't really see much around. There's little church steeples standing there. It looks very much like pictures of the bombed out Cologne, Germany, because, but this is the United States. And interesting little thing that happened was the people from this town, this is the town where I was born, came back after the Second World War, and the factories that they were working in had left and were part of the Marshall Plan in Japan. So it was the beginning of the era we live in now. And I'm also showing you this to talk about infrastructures. Okay, this is the traffic infrastructure. That like back then, this was one of the first big turnpikes. Probably was the first big turnpike in the United States. Now when you go online and you get pictures from Russia, Israel, everywhere looks like New Jersey now. So like I honestly believe that New Jersey always knew something. And that's what I push for. But also in this, my family was not exactly dislocated by this, but not one of the houses that got torn down, but this huge ripple went through the town where like the banks went crazy and real estate went nuts, trying to drive everyone else out, playing everyone against each other. And originally there was what was called, most of Elizabeth was what was called back then salt and pepper neighborhood. That meant it was African American and different ethnic white people. And it was during the Great Migration, lots of African Americans were coming up from the South. And the town was really integrating very well. But then the madness of greedy real estate played everyone against each other. My father wanted to live in the neighborhood we were already in, but we were renting from a relative. And since they had come from like Germany and Ireland, they had lived there. But he couldn't get any loans or anything because the bank said, no, you can't live there anymore. It's not going to happen. And so they steered him to Jersey City, and the Jersey City people took him to like, Jersey City is on like a mountain kind of thing. You know, you've seen it. It's like a kind of like hill that goes across. It's across from Manhattan. But anyway, the real estate people took my father to the top of one of those hills, kind of like the devil talking to Jesus, and in those, what's that painter that made it? But anyway, and said, see those projects down there? That's where we put our, and then he said the N word. And my father said, why are you telling me this? They said, because you don't want to live with them. And he said, I don't care who I live with as long as they're good neighbors. Okay, so they steered us to the next town over from Elizabeth, which is Linden, and we lived in what could be called a buffer zone neighborhood. That means a black and white neighborhood back then that was really interesting because I gotta say, it was light years ahead of the rest of the country. And it's one of the best things that ever happened to me because like no one was thrown together out of any sense of like, well, my father, that's a kind of social activism, what he did, but he's not going to get any credit for it from anyone because he's a working class man who worked in the post office. So like, who cares what they think? And like, but he was like that, and he gave me those values, and that's why when like time came later, when I realized I'm gay, okay, I thought he should accept that, but he didn't, and that was way back in like '66. Okay, so I'm setting a stage here. It's a long introduction, but there we have Elizabeth being fractured up. My family ends up in Linden, in a neighborhood that was nastily called by people who didn't like it, the demilitarized zone, which means like it was in between the African American neighborhood and the white neighborhood. Okay, I love this. This is our neighborhood in Elizabeth, where we eventually all moved out of. Now this, I love that because down here, the kitchen sink, right? So yeah, someone's probably heard everything in the kitchen sink, right? That's a silly thing people say that like, but it actually made sense in a way because my grandmother would go into the kitchen, because when these buildings were built, they didn't have any sinks. They had like an outhouse in the backyard and a pump system. So by the time I was growing up, there was a kitchen sink, and she would point to it, and she would say, look, look, look. It was a big deal to have all these things, and it was. Now, you can't tell anything from this picture. Some people look at it and they freak. They say, God, is that dreary. Okay, but in there, this is the neighborhood that, check this out, to do some research. This was the De Cavalcanti crime family, which became the Sopranos. Okay, down that alley there, during the Depression was a speakeasy. My Aunt Rose, who lived up in one of those windows, she had lots of little bottles inside that had names like anisette and different things. They were the flavors used during Prohibition to like flavor some kind of digestible alcohol that was like used for drinking. So this is like, so I'm showing this to emphasize to you that like each one of us has a kind of outside, but then the inside can be pretty spectacular. Like that building there, it's kind of a generic slum of its time, but it's really a spectacular place with the stuff that went on there. I mean, between the mafia living quietly there and speakeasies and just all these different ethnic groups coming together, and each one of them being this full world. It's the world that is now just beginning to happen with, say, like de Blasio running for mayor. I mean, that's a world that was already existing here, but not too many people knew about it.
What do you mean by de Blasio? Blasio running for
De
mayor?
Blasio running for mayor is a very big deal in this country because he has his son has the big afro.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's I mean,
Being a biracial family.
being a biracial family is like nothing far out. But people in this country are so slow that some people think, wow, it's time. It was always time, but like not everyone had the balls to catch on. Okay, now this is two examples of art. Does anyone know what's happening over here, what that is a picture of? Someone might have seen that in a movie.
From the Alcatraz escape.
What
The
the?
Alcatraz escape.
Right, you got it. Good, good. Now that I love as like a metaphor, and actually art itself, because I honestly believe that most art doesn't get called art, and it just kind of evaporates and slips away, and that people who are artists like us, we're the ones who can make it into something that is brought to a place called the art world, that is a forum of presentation and evaluation to like make that something talked about. Okay, now the way the story goes here, these three guys were in prison at Alcatraz. Now the story is crazy and amazing. They actually escaped by making those heads and putting them on their pillows. They took years to make them. Years. They're made out of toothpaste, anything they could find, toothpaste, plaster. They would save all the little pieces of hair that they would sweep up. One of them got a job sweeping in the barber shop at Alcatraz. And like they got the hair from there. Now they took into consideration that like the lighting would be a certain way at night. So they kind of knew they didn't have to go heavy realistic on this. They were just made to like in the lighting work, and it worked. They got out of Alcatraz and they were never found. So like, you know, there's all these people say, well, they're dead. Other people say they lived. I don't know. But the very fact that they escaped, I kind of see that as a really good metaphor for what art is about. It's about you asserting your freedom somehow and who you are through those things you make. And over here, this is always like the art establishment. Well, that's Bouguereau. He was the one who, I like him, but like, because we're allowed to like him today. See, one time it was like if you said you liked him in an art school, you were like, that was bad, really bad. Like bad enough to like, people would squint at you, maybe spit at you. I don't know, I never got spit at, but they might ostracize you. Okay, but anyway, he's the one who kept Cézanne out of the salon and things like that. So when I was like way back, it's not even important when you study art these days. It shows you how things change. He was presented as the evil, rotten creature of art, and Cézanne was the person leading into the 20th century. And one of our forebears and great saviors. And that also represents established religion and all these things that we're supposed to dislike. Okay. Does anyone know who that is in the center there?
Marlena.
Right. Marlene Dietrich. Do most people know who she is? Raise your hand if you know who Marlene Dietrich is. Okay, that's good. Because one never knows when one gets to be my age what carries on to the next generations. Because I'm old enough to be your grandfather. And like, okay, so there she is, a movie goddess coming down to Earth. So this is really like, it's like Mars and Venus. This is actually made from a little snapshot that my father had. Now, who took the snapshot, I don't know, but he had the snapshot because he was in the Second World War. And it's here for a lot of reasons. One is the Mars-Venus connection. The other one is that most people, okay, here's the thing. I was at a place called the Catholic Worker one day. It's a soup kitchen. And there was a man that had a heart attack, and he fell down on the floor, and he was dying. And so people are screaming, find out who he is. Do it. And his wallet comes out of his pocket. And he was all like dirty from living in the streets and everything. But that wallet was full of like little pictures of like his family, and it had rubber bands wrapped around it. So like it was really a pretty like not in good shape wallet. But those pictures were there. That was kind of like his little world, his gallery, his art world. And so people, remember, boys and girls, it's photography that convulses the art world, even more than Cézanne, because that's what people say, oh, we don't have to get our portraits done by paying a lot anymore. So that's the big convulsion is always technology. Okay, back to the Catholic neighborhood. I love this Virgin Mary because she looks like a giant Barbie doll. And this horrifies Protestants. Why are these Catholics carrying around this doll? The baby Jesus. That is one. They have real human hair wigs, okay? The baby Jesus, okay, they have big spikes up the middle of their head so the crown stays on it, wobbles. But the baby Jesus, one time I saw him in a procession and the spike was loose, or the crown it was bouncing like that. And so, like, this is a good example of like a folk art tradition. It's Southern Italian, but I mean, in the mix of people I grew up around this, so it's like wide open territory, the aesthetics of this world. It's like anything goes and everything goes. Because like I can look at that through the eyes of faith, but like I was around enough other kinds of people to know that when they see it, they go, what? But like to me, it's like God's mother. Okay. Jan Steen, why is this here? Oh, Catholics in a Protestant country. Now this must sound crazy. Why am I talking about that? It doesn't matter to anyone anymore. But when I was growing up, it's like, believe it or not, Catholics were considered these foreign creatures that were going to put the country under the rule of the Pope. And so this is like a picture that it's in a Protestant country, and the tip-off Catholic signifier is this little girl with that baby Jesus statue, see? So that kind of zones in on that. These are Catholics wearing little Protestant outfits so they can get through life, but they're actually into a different aesthetic stuff. Bang, there's my family. But secularization is happening. Okay, there's my aunts that are nuns. There's me over there with the red tie. But my sister does not have a holy statue with her. She has a doll that represents consumerism and American culture. So she's being trained into a new world, but she knows it not. Okay, and it's because everyone else is like sitting there benignly accepting this. But that doll also has, like, it was a revolutionary thing in doll craft at the time. It has rooted hair. Now, when I was a little boy, at first, dolls had like little wigs that were glued on their head that, like, if you like put like really hot water in the bathtub and you stuck the doll's head in the water, you could like kind of dissolve the glue and move the wig anywhere you wanted. So you could put it over their eyes, over their face, and then when it cooled off, they was back there. Okay. But like once the rooted hair was there, it stayed in the same place because it was like human hair. That's what they said. But here we are, a nice Catholic family, about to go through the convulsions of like what was coming. Because in a few years after this, those nuns' habits weren't worn anymore. They modernized and started dressing more up to date. Because those go back to the Middle Ages. And like there's my poor mother there. She was forced to act like Donna Reed by the culture, which, you know, wasn't good for women, really. I love this picture. I made that little cardboard church. Actually, it was around this big. Okay. And like that nun had nothing to do with this. This is the beginning of like lusting for fame and attention and things like that. Because I hung around with that kid. He saw the church, and his mother worked for the publicity apparatus of the town. So she arranged for this picture to be taken, and the nun jumps in. She had nothing to do with it either. That nun is like, I mean, it was like presented like this was part of school. No, it was just me on my own. But she had that kind of, you know, bureaucratic wanting to jump in and get credit thing. But then it also has Thomas Schmidt left. No, that's not me. That's the other guy. How did they do that? But this set a pattern too. This is my endless relationship with power is basically this. And my endless relationship with other people is basically this. Because like always it would happen to me when I was showing at Holly Solomon, I would be at an opening for my own art and there'd be a little group of people standing around and Holly Solomon would go, this is Tommy Lanigan Schmidt, and they'd shake someone else's hand. I mean, so like, I like the invisibility because it's like, it's crazy. Okay, there's the same little church. This is but expanded upon. See? Oh, by the way, BTW. Yes, my mother let me make this in the living room, which was a big concession to like order and decorum. But when I suddenly left home and ran away, being a gay teenager, she threw it down the cellar steps and stomped on it. She was pissed off. Okay, now this is part of the piece that hasn't been shown in a long time. It was just shown, I had a retrospective at PS1. It was very crazy to have the Museum of Modern Art, about 3 years ago, suddenly contact me. I didn't even know what they were coming around for. They didn't even tell me. And then they started carting away boxes and boxes of stuff and going all over the world, gathering things up. And then they said, oh, you're having a retrospective at PS1. And I thought, wow, that's nice. I still don't know what I think of that. It's crazy. So this is like the frame is Duchamp. The rest is more like Christmas card, okay? Because like I like sentimentality and sentiment and all that stuff. This is actually a piece that has like 135 lasagna pans with pictures in that I made of a teenage suicide attempt. A kid who tries to kill himself because he's being beaten up for being gay. It's actually autobiographical. And this is like a composite of the town I grew up in, the part that has the little houses, and that is Swampville. And but see those refinery tanks over there, the oil storage tanks, the gas, whatever. Even before, like such a person as Klaus Oldenburg, the people in that town always referred to them as the giant marshmallows. So like, I honestly do believe that intelligent, creative thinking comes from everywhere. And then the other thing was if the tanks go, so do we. That meant if they blow up, we're gone. And like, so I grew up with in this very fatalist, everyone's going to die world. And there were a lot of kids dying of leukemia. And again, that didn't come to consciousness until like 40 years after it was happening. Okay, here we have, a lot of my stuff is based on, it's just stuff the size people would have at home. It's based on a working class scale of home. It's actually, my great ambition is to like overthrow everything about the Bauhaus and like have home be greater than house. Bauhome, not Bauhaus. Once I said that and like people furious, they were like, how could you say bad things about the Bauhaus? Oh, I can say a lot of bad things, but like, because they only exist in prototypes and a few things, and after that it's downhill. I mean, everything spin-off from them is kind of modern, which is like, I mean, modern is okay because it can be anything that looks like anything else, except not as interesting. Sometimes more interesting though. Okay. This is from the lasagna pan pieces, but this one's in a little plastic frame like you get in a 99-cent store. And this is all done with like whiteout and what you call it, ballpoint pens and there's, like you can't tell on here, there's little flecks of glitter on the shoes there because the guys back then used to wear taps on their shoes. And like this is about, okay, you got to realize, today people talk about being gay. Back then, nothing about being gay existed except that's it, like a big nothing, except you could go to the library, look up the word, and it would be called, you know, a disease, a mental illness, whatever. It was, and there's nothing on TV. No, it was just one big blank, and then anything that was said at all was like bad, and nothing was hardly ever said at all. So that meant, as like a 14 or 13-year-old gay person back then, my realization totally of being gay happens totally through the aesthetics of desire. It does not have any articulation through any kind of intellectual structure that has anything positive in it. The only intellectual structures back then were totally negative, and that is the left and the right. The people on the right thought gay people should be thrown in jail or killed. People on the left thought gay people should be given shock treatments and be treated mercifully and turned into straight people. There was no place at all for gay people then. So this is about, I'm the kid there with the glasses. The other one, we're actually supposed to be the same age, but I was madly in love in my early adolescence with someone who like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, like people like when you're like 14, that this other 14-year-old, like my voice took longer to change, and like the other 14-year-old, he could pass for 25. It was, so that was that other guy. Now, there's a lot of little details in this that are important with things that are going to follow. Like there's this thing that looks like kind of like a tent behind there. That's called a tabernacle. A tabernacle is the thing in a Catholic church where the bread and wine, the body, well, actually, mostly the bread as Christ's body is kept in there. So in other words, it's kind of like a little place that's there to honor it's like God's little house, because it looks like a little tent. So I made, at home, I had in our basement, I had a life-size altar that I had a little tabernacle on that was made out of a box around that big with a little door on it that I made with hinges and everything. And I lined the inside with satin, because they always were very pretty inside. They were lined, they had like fringe, all kinds of like nice details. So I lined the inside with satin, and that was my tabernacle. Up, sexual awareness. This is an old gay magazine that you can see is called Manuel, right? Okay, there's the date, 64. It's a long time ago, boys and girls. So there's no presence culturally for gay people like on TV anywhere. But then this presence is there in like a candy store if you have the eyes to pick it out. And I had the eyes to pick it out. But I needed a little help on how to find these things. So our parish priest was given a sermon. There was like 75 candy stores. This was back before like a long time before like Walmart and everything. So there was like candy stores everywhere, and there were like a whole bunch, maybe 75 in the town. Okay. The priest gets up and gives us. I love these wild celibates ranting about other people's sex lives. They always do that. Okay. So he gets up and he says, "Boys and girls," and he does his like pregnant pauses and looks around. "There are stores in this town selling filthy magazines, and some of you are going out and getting them. You are not to go to the Penn Sweet Shop." Wow, that narrowed it down. I was happy. Okay. I said, oh. And he added into it, he said, "Stores near the railroad are always bad." Okay. I like that. It has something to do with the trade route, like in history, that's how civilization spreads. Okay, so like after like my little altar boy outfit. Okay, this is called a cassock. That's called a surplice. Now, that's the little altar boy outfit. Our mother, was in charge of like keeping that clean and immaculate, so we could always look like good altar boys. Okay, so that meant after serving Mass, it was put on a hanger and I carried it home over my arm, kind of like you might carry a coat over your arm. So one day, because I was serving like 7 o'clock Mass, that's before most people were up, and I go to the Penn Sweet Shop, and I thought, thou shalt not steal. But he'll see me buying it, and that should cause trouble. So I said, I'll buy the Daily News. It was only 5 cents then. I'll stick the magazine in there, and maybe since I'm an altar boy, he won't think I'm robbing things. I did it. I took that magazine. Okay, not that exact one, but that one of that. That was one of the names, Manuel, and that was one. It wasn't this cover, but I got that cover later. Okay, so these would serve the same purpose that all magazines of this serve for adolescent boys. Okay, heterosexual parallels the same. Okay, but where did I hide it? Because I said, I just knew my parents couldn't find this. So I hid it in between the satin lining and the wood of my tabernacle. Now, okay, so real Jesus isn't the one in the church. That's Jesus' body is there, and then the body that I want to get my hands on is in my tabernacle. So see, this is the workings of art developing here. This is art in its raw articulation, without like much of a system behind it, except like one move goes to the next because it's visual. You feel it, you connect it, you make it. Tabernacle. I didn't look at the tabernacle and see those metaphors that way back then, but they're all there. And that's that line that art can walk. You don't always have to be totally aware. And there's an endless argument between the people that think you have to be totally aware and the people that say you don't have to be totally aware. And since you're in art school, you're right in the middle of that argument, always. Okay, go to 1969. Okay, I decided I wanted to show some things in my apartment. No one showed things in their apartment back then. So this is part of it. I made those bishop miters and things like that. They're all made out of household materials and floral wrap, gold floral foil, saran wrap, handy wrap pearls. But they're actually based on something that happened, a value system that I grew up with. When I was a kid, that's called a mitre. That's the bishop's mitre. The real bishop's mitre, when the bishop would come into the church when I was a little boy, I was a short kid, so I was picked to hold the mitre when it got off the bishop's head and to give it back when it went back to the bishop's head. So I wore this big satin cloth that had things in like pockets where you put my hand, because you don't touch the mitre. It was all about mystification of the holiness of the object. He comes into church, and it's all sparkling like diamonds and rubies, and God knows heaven is on earth, and it's all just these magnificent sparkling gems, and then they pass it to the next person, and it finally gets to me, and I look there, and it's actually, it's a piece of cardboard with satin on it, with like little chunks of plastic, with holes melted in them, with like a hot nail or something. And I loved that immediately, because I thought, wow, I didn't think in the word transcend, but I knew it transcended what it was. It was about something bigger than itself. It didn't have to be real diamonds or anything. It was about what art is about, meaning that the assertion of the quality of the thing speaks for a whole world. Up, Twinkie. This is me, boys and girls, but this is back in, oh God, the 60s. This Twinkie took over 40 years to make it to the New York Times. You can look up on your little phones and computers, you can look up Holland Carter, Ecce Homo, Thomas Lanigan Schmidt. Twinkie got to the Times. I am so proud of Twinkie, because when I made Twinkie, people didn't want to know from nothing about Twinkie. I mean, I was making Twinkie because they were going to be the knickknacks in my house. When I was going to marry Frankie that I was in love with. And we were going to have a house full of like pictures like this. I mean, I was like 18 when I made this, but again, there was no gay world then. So this is like me trying to figure it out on my own. So that's where the New York Times finally, and the Museum of Modern Art finally, realized that this has significance attached to it, because it's about cultural meaning being developed through the reality of itself, and not just condescendingly pat on the head. Okay, does anyone know what that picture is? Nobody? I'm shocked. Yes, thank you. Does anyone know what Stonewall is? What is Stonewall?
The bar.
It's a bar? What happened at that bar?
There's a revolution started there.
That's right, a revolution that started there. I am the guy in the stripes. Yes, okay. Boys and girls, you will never meet a person like me again. You'll meet millions of gay people, believe me, but you are never going to meet one like this one. Okay, and I ain't bragging, I'm just telling. When I was 18, my father decided to put me on a ditch digging crew, which I found really crazy at the time, that he was actually going to, he thought he was going to make a man out of me. And the ditch digging crew was supposed to segue into a construction job. It's like surreal. I mean, I'm, pretty girly, and like that was like, what was going, I mean, I know what was going on. He couldn't deal with my gayness. But anyway, the first day I went to the job, I walked into the room where the other kids were sitting. It was every kid that wanted to kill me in high school was there. And it was like the year right after high school, because I went to Pratt for a year, and then this was the summer after Pratt. I just walked out of the room, because I'm not saying I think I'm invisible, but I can once in a while I can be so inconspicuous that I can like just be there and no one notices. I'm glad about that. I walked out of the room. I went home. My father said, "Get the newspaper." It was all happening, and I don't know whether it was happening in super focus or super insanity or what. And I just walked out of the house and went to New York. Now, I don't know anyone that does this. I'm telling you, I got to New York because I had enough money to get the train from Elizabeth, which is the next town, which was like 55 cents then. I got to New York and I met a bunch of other gay teenage runaways, which are this bunch here eventually. And like that was who I hung around with. That was who I lived with. That was the world I knew. And this is a world beneath a certain threshold of not having. This is a very without world. And this was a world like historians, when they visit me, tell me that like I'm the only person from that bunch of people that's still alive. Most of them died before they were like 23. They never got to be 23. Because that street life then, it's nothing like you think it was like. I mean, you could get murdered any time of the day or night. They got beat to death. First of all, when they all came from New York, a lot of them were like younger than I was. I was 18. Some of them were 14. Their parents had thrown boiling water on them, slashed them up by throwing them through like a plate glass door, things like that. People were very marked up. I mean, the guy who had the boiling water thrown on him, that was really like the whole side of his body. So these were a group of people that were not going to take any shit from anybody. This is the bunch that caused the Stonewall riot. Thank God. Now use your visual sense for a second. You're art students. What do you think is in that purse? Can someone figure this out?
Brick.
Who figured that out?
I did.
You got it. That is a brick in there. Yes, because this was Chris. Chris, there's the bricks over there in the building. But Chris was a little skinny thing. Okay, so Chris, didn't want to get beat up all the time. So Chris had a brick in that cute little purse that could just go. Okay. So like every one of these people carried something that they could defend themselves with. And then that night of the Stonewall, this was the group that set it in motion. But it's important to know that back then, gay life happened in a kind of ghetto. Now, an aspect of a ghetto is that it's all groups and all classes of the group in the same place. So like this, it was centered in the Stonewall. So like this group sets in motion the Stonewall riot. It's quickly picked up by the college kids who but we were all had socialized with each other already. So there was, and also it was the era that got its strongest inspiration from the civil rights movement. Every one of these kids here was inspired by the civil rights movement. That was like, I mean, even though everyone was living in the street and very down and out, there was this kind of hope that youth has just by being young. And so that, I made that at the same time. My art is all over the place. That is done deliberately in a kind of expressionistic style, because I was a teenager and I read, expressionism expresses the wild emotions of the inner person on the outside made into art, something like that. So I thought, good, that's what my friends are like. So I'll make art that's like expressionistic. And this is before neo-expressionism, because that's made in the 60s. That's drag queen hooker with baby doll. I'm very proud of the baby doll, because the baby doll was actually like a little tiny party favor. That is actually like the baby doll itself is a ready-made. The rest is a handmade. But down the bottom, there are like pieces of glass that really are from the street. And this is like, some collector owns this now, I don't remember who, but it's going toward a higher perception. These people changed my life. Does anyone know who that is? Jack Smith. That's Jack Smith, and that's Charles Loveland. Okay, Jack Smith, you should look up. It's easy to find on YouTube. You can find pieces of Flaming Creatures, a movie that he made that was prohibited by the Supreme Court. I mean, it was like really like, it caused a big scandal. And it's funny because when you look at it today, it doesn't seem like it would. I mean, it's a good example of like the way the country's changed. You can also look up a movie called The Destruction of Atlantis. Look that one up, The Destruction of Atlantis. That's a documentary on Jack Smith. Okay, he died of AIDS in like the 90s, I think. When there was a period when anyone who got anything to do with AIDS would die because there was no way to contain it like there is now. So he died. But Flaming Creatures is interesting because Flaming Creatures is just a bunch of, it's beautiful, it's visually beautiful. It's black and white and it's like silvery with the light going through. It's just some queens dancing with each other. But the way it's lit has this like dreamlike quality. So check that out and see it because it has no narrative except the dreamlike quality of the dance that's going on. And that was done in like 1962 he made that. So in a sense, that segues and kind of prophesies what happens at the Stonewall. Because the Stonewall riot happens because it was the only place that there was same-sex slow dancing. Believe it or not, there was no, you could get killed for dancing, or I mean, you can still get beat over the head with a bat for holding your boyfriend's hand. I mean, so, but like slow dancing with another guy, that was like not done. And the Stonewall mafia-run place, I was very lucky to come from that mafia neighborhood I did, because I learned a system of respect that I can't explain. It has something to do with how you treat people and what you expect from them, and how you act if they don't treat you with respect, but you always try to treat them with respect anyway. But the slow dancing, it was the dancing together. Okay, holding on to someone, you say to yourself, I'm human. I'm not just like what I'm being told. I was told by the culture when I was growing up, I was supposed to want to commit suicide. I was, you know, gayness was some kind of, it wasn't even gay, word gay wasn't even said. It was always homosexual, it was kind of clinical, and it was always said in a way like you're supposed to hate yourself, that was it. So like holding on to other people dancing when I was a teenager, and it was the same dance as we did at CYO, that's Catholic Youth Organization. Something inside, again, it goes back, this is not the articulation of the intellect as it became later. Academics are good, they're wonderful people, believe me, I love them, because they talk about things and they find ways to articulate them in words. But the reality of the thing when it comes up through the body itself and the heart and soul of a person is a much bigger deal, and that again is the basis of art. And us dancing with each other at the Stonewall, when they raided the place that night, that's why people fought back, because they were going to take that away. And it was not a demonstration, it was a riot. It wasn't organized, it just happened. And you have to remember that. It was not a student demonstration. Okay, there's Charles Ludlam. He's amazing. He's dead too. You can look him up. He died of AIDS. He was like in his 40s when he died. He was a playwright. And I wish they were both still alive because they're both geniuses. But he gave me the best advice about making art anyone ever did. I was like around 19. I was at a dinner party at Henry Geldzahler's house. Does anyone know who Henry Geldzahler was? Oh, Henry Geldzahler was I think the first curator of American contemporary art, or the second. But he was the person who articulated pop art and initially made Andy Warhol famous. And then he hated Andy Warhol because Andy Warhol took off on his own. But anyway, so I was at this dinner party and Charles Ludlam was there. And like, he says, oh, come in the kitchen and help me with a salad or something. And I said, oh, I just made some art. Do you think Henry's going to like it? 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 And like, Charles holds me up against the wall like that. He says, you stupid little queen. What? Stupid little queen? He said, don't worry about what he likes. You're an artist. You're supposed to teach them what art is. You don't go pandering to people like that. And I thought, wow, that makes sense. And it's also like a declaration of independence, or a kind of, you know, emancipation proclamation. Like you're told you're not just going to be a mere Madonna of curators. are an acolyte of idiots. I mean, you're told you're on your own. You might have to starve for it or really like struggle for it. But when he said, you're the person that tells them what art is, it was a big moment. And like, I still think that way. Okay, there's my chalices. Okay, this gets redone a million times, but this was all done originally in my apartment on the Lower East Side. Now these slides, again, they're all over the place. They're not in chronological order because if I would try to, there would be like a million slides. There's so many stuff. I mean, but anyway, this is my anti-bauhaus stuff. Wow, how does that have to do with the Bauhaus? I mean, it's like, because it's all, well, it's just all metal and plastic. That's the basic gist of it. The Bauhaus was into like, you're going to use metal and plastic and stuff like that. Okay, I'm using metal and plastic, but I'm using it in a way that has nothing to do with this kind of Germanic, constipated sense of like, they're doing things right, yeah. No, it's not, I can say that because I'm German, okay, Schmidt. I mean, no, this is more like, I guess, the Bavarian side of me. That is more like, you know, the beer hall or something. And the New York Times, when they wrote about this, they were very funny because this curtain here is a bedspread. That's all pretty colors. But Roberta Smith said, she goes, I don't know what to think of this. I couldn't tell whether a Russian Orthodox priest or the Easter Bunny was going to jump out of that door. So, oh, speaking of the Russian Orthodox, they're being very bad to gay people there. But like they're nasty. But like in Russia, but they have these chalices now there that are like this big to give communion to lay people. With a cup that is this big. You got to check it out. You can find it somewhere online. I've seen. They're like, I've never seen anything so amazing as those crazy chalices. These are like mini chalices compared to that. Okay, this was like the piece that liberated me from my first apartment that got burnt down. Holly Solomon, she was a dealer. She came, an art dealer back then. She wasn't an art dealer yet. She came to visit me, and she said, oh, I want to give you a show. She didn't have a gallery yet. It was at a loft. And I said, okay, since I'm hung up on like the body of Christ and the body or whatever. I mean, because again, I mean, body art before people talk about it is like not the same way it's done. Okay, there's like. In the center of that is the little white host. That little white circle there is the body of Christ. Actually, it's a piece of cardboard in this. But this was just made because I like to do it. And I like all that exuberance. And like when they finally gave me that retrospective, like last year, who was that? Ken Johnson, New York Times, said that my work had like beaver-like intensity. I like that. You know, like industrial, you know. How do I talk about that? These are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're made out of sandwich wrap. This is an iconostasis door. This is all my anti-Bauhaus stuff. So celebrating sandwich wrap and magic markers and like Russian Orthodox iconography and not knowing whether the Easter Bunny or a Russian Orthodox priest is going to jump out. Okay. This goes back to the lasagna pans, again, 125, 130 or something like that. They're like the Duchampian ready-made, and then these sentimental pictures in it. It's all about a teenage attempted suicide. But I made it in the 80s. No one was talking about teenage suicides then. And like it's made about something that happened in the 60s. And like these pictures don't do it justice because like it's all made with nail polish and all kinds of stuff from around the house. And like the way light plays on it, you can't get any idea from this because it's frozen on the specks of glitter aren't glittering. They're photographed. So like you don't get any sense of how this shifts as you move in front of it. This is all based on like medieval enamels and things like that, because that's layers. This is made with layers of clear contact paper that trap the light in between, and so like looking at them is not like looking at this, and this is about the seasonal change around this working class church. Okay, that's the sense about the paperboy rides around the town, thinking about whether he should kill himself because he got beat up the night before, and the snow falls, and the snow piles up, and the snow is a symbol of death, and at the same time it's this really beautiful thing. And like up, the paperboy sees the Russian church. Paperboy starts thinking inside about a baby being baptized. Oh, the paperboy's thinking of killing himself. So he's finding a metaphor to get through like those times of like, I'm going to kill myself, because I didn't. Okay, up, there's the whole baptism. Now, see the one with the baby under the water? Think. The aesthetics of this is totally physiological. What would happen if the priest didn't pull the baby up? Whoa. Okay, the priest does pull the baby up. I mean, this is actually, I mean, what I like about the Russian aesthetics is that, okay, and this gets into a real East-West thing, is this kind of like immersion aesthetic. Okay, the Western Catholic Protestant thing is aspersion. That means you sprinkle the water on and say, oh, there's a few little drops, you pour some on the head and say, it takes care of it. No, this one really gets into it. It's like the whole baby goes under the water. So think what the baby's physiologically going through then. Ah, I'm dying. Okay, and then when the baby comes up, the baby's hooked on religion from then on in. I mean, it's like there's no turning back, because I mean, the baby comes up into like, you know, clouds of incense, sparkly icons, people singing pretty songs. I mean, come on now. I mean, that's aesthetics. Whoop. Oh, the paperboy doesn't die. He just tries to kill himself, cuts his face up, which that picture I didn't put in because too many people, too many pictures. Okay, the snow piles up outside the building. The paperboy rises up like Jesus rising from the tomb, which is the symbolism of the baptism of the baby being under the water and everything. And actually that composition is based on an 8th century Armenian painting, icon of Jesus harrowing hell. Okay. This was made in the 80s. This is the Infant of Prague as a symbol of liberation theology. This has toured the world and now is in some private collection. And see, there's like a few people that like my art that take care of me. Most people don't care about it. But like the people that like it keep me going, because they get something out of this. Because like liberation theology is interesting. Most people didn't hear it talked about much until Barack Obama becomes president. And then there was that big to-do about liberation theology. But it's been around for a long time. Up, this is the last slide. This is just a bunch of people getting together and playing. And they have bishop's mitre on. There's Augusto Machado, who is a friend of Jack Smith, who is a great performer artist. These are artists that float in and out of plays, that don't get a lot of credit. And over there is my studio assistant with that crazy, intense look on his face. Like he's of your generation, and he's out to like conquer the world through art. But like there he is around all the old people with like their bishop's mitres on their heads, because like I guess and the one is a pope right there, Augusto. I'm only a bishop there. A bishop with a baby doll angel on my head. And this is Glenn Santiago. He's done a lot of like Day of the Dead altars at the Museo del Barrio. And John is a musician. And so this goes back to the source of art in play. And this is where it stops. Okay, so like questions? Mm-hmm. Well, the spectacle is a big part of it, but the best thing about what's called pre-Vatican II Catholic art, because Catholic art is not as into the spectacle as it used to be, but when I was growing up, is that it's at home as much as in the church back then, so that it's all about like entwining an involvement with emotions into prayer. The good part of it is it can get you through horrible parts of life because of the emotional focus of it. A bad part is it could enslave a person into a kind of like narrow view. But it's very well worked out. It probably goes back to like the Greek statues that had like the glass eyes or the gems in the eyes, because the Greek statues were originally all painted pretty colors. and the Roman statues too. And so Christianity just picked up on that. Popular stuff, as you know from if you just watch TV, the colors, that kind of emotional focus can be fucked up and bad depending who uses it for what, or it can be very involving and beautiful. And it's like all other art. It depends on the quality of the individual piece and situation. Well, okay, Peter Ely, that was the main curator, and then Jocelyn Miller was the other curator. When they were putting it together, it was like, they first asked me what I thought, and I felt, I just said what I wasn't even thinking, but it was really what I thought. I said it feels like an exhumation. Because all this stuff had been buried from my site. A lot of it, I had like things stored at home, but like most of it was everywhere else. Like Peter Ely went to Germany to get the big iconostasis, and I would tell friends that, and they wouldn't even believe it. They would say like, "Oh, he just wanted to take a trip. There's nothing's going to happen," because like it was like, until it finally happened, I didn't think it was even going to happen. And then it was his idea to like show the room kind of like a church. That was not my idea, and he did a good job. I mean, me and him had a few little arguments, but he's a good curator because it all came together in a way that, like, that room he put the iconostasis from Germany was in the center, focused, and then everything was like side chapels in a church. It's actually it's built into the aesthetic because like when Holly Solomon would say how should she show my art, this was back when she first was interested, I would say, well, in a room it needs at least 2 or 3 pieces, and you put them around the room, and then because of the high voltage visibility, they'll play off each other. And so if you put a whole bunch in a room, they get that kind of like very high visual thing. And then there's the subtle stuff that goes through it that is more cozy too. So all that played into that show because like people liked it. Well, that was the wall about gentrification, I think, that had the giant bed bugs made out of corrugated cardboard. Yeah, that was made in the 80s. That was when it was shown. People, like a lot of like real estate people, were very pissed off originally. Now it's like so old that it's just like it was shown. And it was just shown, and people liked it because there was giant bed bugs in it, and gold rats, and Miss Piggy had like giant blood-sucking fangs, and people get into that craziness. But it's all about. When it was made, it was when Ronald Reagan was first president. Now, the art world jumped on board and was gluttonous with greed at the time. So don't let them tell you anything else, boys and girls. Okay, so I made that because, okay, the Reagan era, in a sense, is just coming to an end. It was the election of Obama. I mean, that whole kind of ravenous, get what you can stuff was like going on since then. And that piece is about that kind of like devouring greed. But I wanted it to be funny too, because I wanted people to enjoy it, because it's a very Rococo piece. I mean, the bed bugs are kind of on the wall swirling all over the place. And there's like a few hundred bed bugs. And like, it's funny because bed bugs made a comeback. I mean, since then, I mean, when I made that, bed bugs were only in what was called bad neighborhoods. Like, I was living in a bad neighborhood, so there was occasional bed bugs. But it wasn't until gentrification went full force that, like, all the folk customs about how not to get bed bugs were thrown out. Like, you don't pick up a mattress in the street. I remember I saw someone picking up a mattress in the street. This was like about 15 years ago. I said, don't take that home, it's in the street. And they said, oh, shut up, what do you know? And I found a good match. And I thought, well, and then there was a few weeks after, there was like, in the Village Voice, was ballerina bitten to death by bedbugs or something like that. And like, maybe it was her, I don't know. Well, I have made monumental things, but they're like made with like the domestic scale within. Like if you're at the PS1 shows, what's called the iconostasis is pretty big. It's like couldn't fit into this, it's higher than this room, and it's wider than all the way across there. But the parts, see, yes, the scale is domestic, and that's deliberate, because that goes back to my anti-Bauhaus thing, where like the Bauhaus had a thing where they were going to civilize the working class. And so like when the projects were built, they weren't, like people love to scream at me once in a while, say the Bauhaus was not responsible for the projects. No, they're not. But like some of the mentality that talk was used back then about like the function has the connection to them, and the rooms and the projects were originally, the kitchen is very small, which is the stupidest thing on the face of the earth, and so nasty to people living there. These are people that don't have maids or anything, and then the kitchen had always been a room of socializing. And like suddenly the projects are being told, you're lucky you're being given this place to live and it's supposed to turn you into a good person or something. And then there's like this living room, very bourgeois, which I have no problem with, except that it should have had no wall, and the kitchen should have been part of it. And that was all I don't know what was going on in their heads. So like, yeah, my art is always about like, because I honestly believe that the art world should be a place where like all different groups and classes assert their cultural points of view through their own aesthetics, not through the aesthetic imposed upon them. Like if the art world is like stenciling box stencils on like canvas, and so if I stencil, hi, I'm gay, on a it's like, I mean, because I've lived through stuff like that, where like you adapt to the, if you adapt to the accepted aesthetic only, well, chances are you'll be just as alienated as if you would have any old job, because you're just doing a job, you're not doing your work as an artist. But yeah, the art it's aggressively domestic scale. Holly Solomon, yes, she like championed the pattern and decoration movement, but I've never felt like I was part of it, and only in retrospect am I like pointed out as being and has a lot to do with those artists and Holly Solomon Gallery. I mean, it's my art is very decorative, but I never thought of it as part of that movement. Well, the materials, it goes, remember when I showed the bishops, I talked about the bishop's mitre with the plastic chunks in it. Okay, it goes back to moments like that, because my mother, see, people don't realize that people in different classes, and working class people a lot of times, have value systems that they're very confident in. They're not ashamed of where they are. And they're not ashamed of being poor. My mother, her only like real gold was her wedding ring, and the rest of her jewelry was to look pretty. It was all what people would call costume jewelry. But it's a term I never heard growing up. She just had earrings, bracelets, rosary beads, things like that. My parents were their kind of materialism was not an American kind of bourgeois materialism of investment and everything. No, it was about just wanting enough to have the house, keep it going, and live in a place where everyone got along. And then have these moments of like celebration, that everything is sparkly, and the sparkly being not of diamonds, of real diamonds, but feeling that elevation of spirit is the magnificent center of that. I mean, because I live near the Diamond District, and I love to walk through there at noon and see the diamonds blasting out, because they really catch light. It's bang! I mean, that's spectacular. But I actually prefer seeing like a drag queen in the street at night, like that is like maybe a little tipsy, walking around the corner, like as the dawn happens, because there's an expression, if you stay up all night, after being up all night, there's an expression called breaking night. And it's a magnificent expression, because it means, actually, if you use that expression with your friends and you're tuned into it, you feel like you're somehow part of the world turning. And like whenever I would see these drag queens that were kind of down and out, like turning the corner after maybe turning a trick, like sparkly and somehow like ready to fall down but keeping going with some kind of sparkly hairdo or something and whatever. It was always like a magnificent moment of like assertion of human dignity. And that's what I really feel it has to do with. It's like people asserting their dignity in a way that is not about. I mean, eventually the art world catches up to these things, but most of it evaporates in life. Like the drag queen walking around the corner, there will be like a Nan Goldin photograph or something that catches some of it. But the real thing is always better. And it's important to know that. I mean, I'm sure all of you have had those experiences that we could call very real, where you suddenly feel very centered in something that is mediated through itself alone. I mean, that happens in all good art, all great art. That happens, but it happens in the street too. But actually, what's funny about Scotch tape is like it's, for the most part, it's very archival. It does hold up. I mean, back when I was first using it, I mean, because I've been using it since I was a kid, but when art world people first started, the first thing they said was it's not archival. This was back in like the late 60s, mid 60s. But it does hold up. And it's even gotten like the packing shipping tapes, the one that's called Crystal Clear. That one is like, you can burn that maybe, but it's never going to fall apart. So they're archival, but my relationship with them is one, it's basically the materials I grew up with, and then at a certain point, when I would read about art and the Bauhaus and all these different things and talk about, you know, that relationship to like working class people was I said, wait a minute, I want the native to be their own anthropologist is basically what my art is about. What I'm making is parts. I spend years sometimes making parts. The beaver-like intensity. Like I sit with the TV on, just twisting things and stapling things, twisting things and stapling things. Because that also I see as like related to like the old sweatshops and factories. They're mostly gone in the United States now, but that was like a homage when I first started to factories and stuff like that where people work. But at this point, that is mostly like a kind of like therapy for myself, to just keep twisting and stapling, twisting and stapling, and then eventually it becomes something. But I like doing that because a million memories go through my mind or something when I'm like watching, you know, TV and watching whatever is on, like Law and Order or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Because I like the visuals in Buffy, and then I like the writing on Law and Order. Because I love that Buffy, I love that she happens in a school all the time. There's something I love about that. That like they're always like finding like people that want to kill them in the school, like, and then they somehow like, you know, and she's so earnest. I love her earnestness. Well, the notion of outsider, see, everything in the art world never apologizes for what it says. Eventually they just all change, but they never go to you and said, we drove you insane, you tried to kill yourself, this person died, whatever, because like they didn't want to listen. No, they just jump on board to whatever comes along. So like probably as like this century goes on, all those terms will meld and other terms will come along. Because like, okay, when I went to Pratt for a short while, they would say things, stupid things, like there's no such thing as contemporary folk art. And then at Christmas, you see Christmas trees everywhere. I mean, what was wrong with these people? I mean, and then like, you know, people, I remember kids would hang up drawings for crits, and they would insist that, this is to hang up a drawing, it's not even the art. They would insist we had to use masking tape. This one girl used Scotch tape once. The teacher went ballistic. I mean, what is that about? I mean, I would assume things like that still go on. But like it all goes back to Charles Ludlam in the kitchen calling me a stupid little queen and saying, stupid little queen, you got to teach them. I mean, I would think the artist is supposed to be intuitively ahead of like the people that are going to be the verbal articulators of that art. And of course, it's good to learn to verbally articulate these things, but it's not your primary duty ever. And all those categories can be very destructive if you believe them. They're fluid, they're mutable, they're changeable, and they will change. Again, the sad thing is that the people that tell you that they're a certain way, generally, like when the change happens, maybe they're so like pragmatic or something that they never admit they said those things. They just go to the next thing that they're supposed to say. I would say they're all important. Like the process is a continual discovery, because in the process you're learning things about like where you make like your own turning points that change the product or whatever you want to call the thing. Okay, so like when you're working in the solitude of your own work, you have those moments. And that's the process. And that's a magnificent feeling, because then you know you're not just a cog in the wheel. When you make those decisions that may be not like what you planned, but you know the decision that has a kind of instinctual quality attached to it is a greater decision than what you planned, and it changes everything. And then what you make changes because of that decision. Both. It's like all of that is together. I mean, that's why like there's like the people that like don't like the religious part. It doesn't bother me if they don't like the religious part. The religious part is very important to me, but it's also it transcends the religious part, because all over the world there is art like this. In every country, regardless of religions or philosophies, that generally, again, it comes out in celebratory situations. And then whatever it's expressing is articulated through that culture's way of talking about it. Sex and love are all about heaven. I mean, everyone here that has been in love, held on to somebody, that's heaven. In Catholic theology, that's actually the highest symbol of heaven. They don't like to talk about it, but like the Song of Songs in the Bible, that oh, that you would kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore all the maidens love you. Draw me after you. The king has brought me into his chambers. That's all about sex and love. And that's used as, that's always the highest metaphor for prayer that doesn't request anything but just wants a transcendent unity with God. The way that like sexual love creates a transcendent unity with another person. That's a big part of my art. And so I want that transcendent unity to happen in little sparkles. Well, it depends on how those, I think those accessories are vital to the center of it. If you go back to St. Augustine, he was a Neoplatonist. There's a lot of things I don't like about him, but the Neoplatonist aspect of Christianity ties into the thing about the Song of Songs and the great embrace with God and everything like that. But it also has to do with being delighted with the sparkle of things, which is pretty pagan and interesting that way, because it's kind of like saying when the lights go out we die, so we celebrate the light being on. That's what glitter is all about. That's why kids like glitter. They don't look at it and say, oh, this is about me dying and being alive at the same time. But they kind of know it. And like all of this, like in the Catholic Church, the best vestments, that's the stuff the priest wears, generally have like sparkle going through it. And like it's just kind of like the Puritan aspect of Catholicism rejects all kind of externals and just wants they're like the Cistercians, there's orders of monks who want everything kind of plain. They're minimalist. Actually, you should get a book called The Shape of Time by George Kubler. He actually talks about the Bauhaus evolving out of Cistercian monks in the Middle Ages. See, nothing is born fully from whatever, independent. But The Shape of Time was like Henry Geldzahler's favorite book. It's like the curator's best kept secret. It's a very easy book to read. It's not ponderous. and it's all about the history of objects. But they get into, in that book, all about the kind of reductivism of certain orders of monks that were about like not having decorative things. But the lay people, okay, St. Bernard was the one who was against decoration, but also he thought the lay people were so stupid that they needed pretty things. But it's interesting, his way of framing that is saying they're stupid, so they're uneducated. I don't think it has anything to do with stupidity. It's just an articulation of intelligence that is not a verbal one. Because I've known illiterates that have been very intelligent people but have never got a chance to learn to read. Implicit, explicit in my art is always the idea of a community of support. And I always hope the art world can be that. It hasn't always been that. So the only time, I've never wanted to back away from it, but at certain times I felt like nobody cares, or someone's trying to get rid of me, or whatever. But those things always work out because there's always enough people around. If they like what you're doing, they'll help you out. I mean, that's been my understanding. And I hope that's the way it works for other people. But it doesn't make life easy. But you look at art history and you say, well, I know Jack Smith, who I knew, died on welfare of AIDS. He's a genius. I mean, that's like, if we're gonna think within recurring themes in art, that's like Vincent van Gogh. I mean, Jack Smith didn't kill himself, but well, the art world in the 80s was saying this crazy thing about there are no more starving artists. What bullshit. There were lots of people making stuff that wasn't the stuff they liked, that they didn't care if they starved. So, I mean, the people who buy art are sometimes good, sometimes not so good, and sometimes don't notice people they should notice, but somehow they get noticed. Not usually, because I like it fancy. And it doesn't have to be in Latin, but I'll go to the Greeks and the Russians, because they do a better job. But I have a hard time with the anti-gay stuff. So Mass is fascinating just because it's such a huge synthesis of so many cultural things. But I don't go that much because the contemporary Mass, Catholic Mass, isn't that interesting to me. It's kind of dull for me. He lived on, it was crazy. He lived on the next block going further west. Where I lived was I lived in a neighborhood that you suddenly crossed Avenue B, it was like murder land. Okay, really, you could get killed there any time of the day or night. But I kind of liked it there, not because I liked danger or anything, but because you get up in the morning, you hear roosters crowing. It was a very rural place in a state of panic and disintegration because the industrial center was breaking down and no one had jobs, and there's just a lot of people going on heroin and things. But Paul Tech lived on the next block, and he lived in a big storefront, and I never saw any connection between myself and him. I mean, people do. They'll make a connection, but I would look and say, well, because he made that, you ever see that Death of a Hippie piece? Okay, that was shown right away in some Upper East Side gallery, which is fine. I mean, but I didn't think it was anything to do with someone being on the outside. I mean, it's funny how he's being presented now as someone who's just being rediscovered or something. He was always in the in crowd. But I heard the ripple through different art schools and things about how he's generally talked about as not getting recognition or something. He got recognition. But again, he was on the next block over, and to me the next block over was a whole different world. It was the way real estate distributed New York back then. The block I lived on was Murderville, and his block was he could have a storefront. I mean, no storefront could exist on the block that I was living in without being smashed in. Well, you've seen the meat pieces, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, you've seen the meat pieces that have the different color plexiglass? Mm-hmm. those are magnificent because like the way he uses that and closes that in there, but that's kind of like, that kind of has a lot to do with relics and things like that. But relics usually wouldn't be displayed that way. It's interesting. It's kind of interesting his take on showing this chunk of meat type stuff, which is not meat. It's like whatever he makes out of like wax or something. Comes through that, and I can see that. But like, I just do it a different way. I mean, I guess there is that connection. I mean, because there's Catholics. Don't forget the word Catholic means what? Universal. So it can mean a lot of types and ways of doing things that are, because a Protestant thing is usually totally scriptural. It's like the word says, the word doesn't. All the visual stuff is idolatry. Skip it, hate it. Just like zone right in on like keeping your nose to the grindstone, kill the Indians, take over the world. I mean, you know, that's America. It was the section of the Lower East Side that was east of Avenue B back in the 60s was like a different world. It's hard to describe. I mean, actually, when I lived there, I survived because, like, there was okay, my apartment when I first moved in got robbed a lot. This was in 1966. And I thought, oh, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to move, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. I didn't have any money. So I can't, and then some guy knocks on the door. I look through the peephole and I thought, oh no, that's this gang leader. What am I going to do? Okay. So, like, he wore like a black cashmere coat. Because when people say gangs, I don't know what the people picture what, I don't know. But he wore like the coat like senators wear, right? Or like mafia people wear. I said, well, I gotta let him in. He's knocking on the door. And he comes in, and I had like a children's encyclopedia that I got because I grew up with. I saw in the secondhand, so the book of knowledge. He asked me, he said, can you read? And I said, yeah. And okay, my grandmother only went to like the 5th grade, so I was used to being around people who were barely literate. It was not a surprise. And then he sat down, and he was like 25, and he could barely sound out his letters. And like, he said that if I like helped his family with like notes for school and things like that, like absent notes and things like that, writing them, that no one would ever bother me again. And no one ever bothered me again there. It was, but like, there was that moment when I thought he just wanted to kill me. But then he kind of gave me like, it was interesting because he was this man that had a lot of power in that neighborhood. And like the very fact that he could sit there and allow himself that moment of humiliation where I could see him sounding out his letters like a 5-year-old was like very big of him for real. And so without him I'd be dead. So so like, but that neighborhood is like, it's shocking to talk about what worlds were like back then. Any more? Okay, are we finished? Or there's like, does one want to squeeze one more in or something? Okay, we're over?